I was a sophomore at Jefferson High, a large suburban school that felt like a maze most days. The library was one of the few places I could find peace, a quiet refuge from the noise and crowds. I often stayed after classes, sometimes late into the evening, to work on projects or study for exams. Most of the time, I was alone, or occasionally I'd see a few classmates scattered around, heads down and focused. The librarians were friendly but kept to themselves, and the janitor was a sort of shadowy figure I rarely noticed. The janitor was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with a thin frame and a permanent stoop. He didn't talk much, just moved silently through the halls with his mop and bucket, always watching but never engaging. I never thought much of him until one particular evening when things started to feel off. It was a Tuesday, and I had stayed late to finish a history paper. The library was nearly empty by the time I settled into my usual corner by the window, the desk lamp casting a soft glow on my notes. I remember feeling tired but determined to get everything done. I had about an hour before closing time, and the quiet was perfect for concentration. As I flipped through my textbook, I became aware of a faint whispering sound. At first, I thought it was just my imagination or maybe the wind outside rustling through the trees. But the whispers grew clearer, like someone murmuring just beyond my ear. I looked up, scanning the room, but no one was there. The only other person I could see was the janitor, who was near the back shelves, silently pushing his mop across the floor. The lights flickered once, twice, and I blinked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I told myself it was just the old wiring acting up, nothing supernatural. But then, I noticed some of the books on the nearby shelves were slightly out of place. A few had shifted as if someone had been rifling through them. I glanced toward the janitor, who was now standing completely still, staring in my direction. His face was unreadable, and he didn't say a word. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, I turned back to my paper. But the whispering came again, this time more urgent, like a low hiss that made my skin crawl. I looked around the room once more, hoping to find the source. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, something darted behind the stacks. My heart pounded, and I swallowed hard. I stood up to stretch and felt the cold air brush past me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then, suddenly, I felt a light pressure, like a cold hand brushing my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance, but no one was there. The janitor had moved closer, standing silently nearby, his eyes fixed on me. I wanted to ask if he had just touched me or if he'd seen anything strange, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I packed up my things quickly, feeling the weight of eyes on me from every corner of the room. The lights flickered again, and I could swear I heard the soft rustling of pages turning somewhere behind the shelves. I hurried to the exit, glancing back once before slipping out into the hallway. The janitor was gone, vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone with the uneasy silence. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the library after dark, something that wasn't quite human. I asked a few friends if they'd ever noticed anything strange, but most just shrugged it off as their imagination or tiredness from studying. Still, every time I passed the library after school, I felt that same prickling sensation, like invisible eyes watching me. Looking back, I wonder if the janitor knew more than he let on. Maybe he had been there a long time, silently guarding or hiding something in those quiet halls. I never saw him speak to anyone else, and no one seemed to know much about him beyond the fact he'd worked there for years. That semester, I started to avoid staying late in the library. I switched to the student lounge or empty classrooms when I needed quiet space. But the memory of that night, the cold hand, the whispers, the flickering lights, stayed with me, a shadow trailing every late night I spent in that old building. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I hear the faintest echoes of those whispers in my mind. I wonder if the library's secrets are still waiting for someone to uncover them, or if some places are meant to stay undisturbed. Either way, I've learned that some quiet corners hide more than just silence. After that unsettling night in the library, I thought I'd found a way to steer clear of whatever was lurking in those halls. But school has a way of trapping you in places you can't always avoid, and a few weeks later, I ended up in detention that I couldn't get out of. It was held in one of the oldest classrooms at the very end of the corridor, a room that felt like it belonged to a different century altogether. The room was stuffy and dim, with peeling paint on the walls and ancient wooden desks that scraped against the floor when moved. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, barely illuminating the space. The windows were high and narrow, letting in only a sliver of the fading afternoon light. Rumors swirled among students that the classroom was haunted, strange noises, sudden cold drafts, and sometimes even objects moving on their own. On that particular day, the teacher in charge handed out the detention slips with a distracted look and then suddenly left the room, locking the door behind her. No explanation. We were left alone in that cramped space, a handful of students who didn't know each other well, all staring at the locked door. At first, we tried to make light of it, joking about how the teacher probably had some emergency. But as the minutes ticked by, the room seemed to grow colder. I could see my breath puff in the air, and a chill crept up my spine. The light overhead flickered with increasing frequency, casting long, twitching shadows on the walls. Then came the tapping. At first, it was soft and irregular, like a branch brushing against a window. But it soon became clear it was coming from the ceiling tiles above us. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if someone, or something, was trying to get our attention. We looked at each other nervously, but no one wanted to speak up. We tried the door to see if we could get out, but it was jammed tight. The handle wouldn't budge no matter how hard we pushed or pulled. The whispered voices started next, soft, distant murmurs echoing just beyond our hearing. The words were indistinct, but the tone was frantic, almost pleading. Panic began to settle in. The temperature dropped even further, the room feeling like it was being sucked into a freezing void. A shadow appeared in the corner of the classroom, just beyond the reach of the flickering light. It was vague and shifting, like a dark smudge that didn't quite belong. None of us dared to approach it, but we couldn't look away either. Minutes stretched like hours. Suddenly, the door clicked and swung open on its own. The teacher reappeared in the doorway, looking calm as if nothing had happened. She said nothing about the locked door or the cold, shivering students inside. She simply told us to gather our things and leave. We filed out quickly, glancing back at the room with unease. None of us spoke on the way back to our classes. I never volunteered for detention again, and whenever I passed that end-of-corridor classroom, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I still wonder what happened in there during those long minutes when we were alone. Was it just an old building settling, or had something else been sharing that room with us? The flickering lights, the tapping in the ceiling, the shadow in the corner, it all felt like a warning or a message I couldn't decipher. After that day, the weirdness at school seemed to grow, and I started to notice small things, whispers when I was alone in the hallways, doors closing softly behind me when no one was there. The school felt less like a place of learning and more like a maze filled with secrets waiting in the dark. Emma was a senior at our school, someone I didn't know very well but had seen around, quiet, serious, always focused on her soccer practice. The school grounds usually felt safe, a place where you could walk home without worrying too much, especially during daylight. But lately, there had been whispers about a stranger lurking nearby, and everyone was on edge. I remember Emma telling me about what happened one afternoon after practice. She was walking alone, the sun dipping low but still bright enough to see every step. The path she took was familiar, a shortcut that most of us used to get home faster. Usually peaceful, but that day something changed. As she walked, she noticed a figure trailing her from a distance. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, maybe someone else walking the same way. But when she quickened her pace, the figure did too. Emma felt her heart race, that uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. She ducked into a narrow alley, hoping to lose whoever was behind her. Then, footsteps followed, quick and deliberate. Turning around, she saw a man trying to grab her, his face shadowed but his intent clear. She froze for a split second, but adrenaline kicked in, and she broke free, sprinting back toward the school grounds. Emma burst through the doors and immediately told the staff what had happened. The school went on alert, and the police were called. It turned out the man was a local drifter with a history of stalking and harassment. Emma's quick thinking and courage led to increased security measures at school, and she began counseling to deal with the trauma. Her story shook the whole school. It was a stark reminder that even in places we think are safe, danger can be very real and close. Emma's bravery didn't just protect herself but made all of us more aware of the risks around us. It also opened conversations about safety and how vulnerable we can be, even in familiar surroundings. I admired her courage, even though I knew the experience left scars. We all have moments that change us, and for Emma, that moment was a terrifying run from a stranger. I hope that by sharing what happened, she could find some peace and strength to heal. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't visible, and the scars aren't just on the skin, they're in the mind and heart, where they linger long after the danger has passed.